Heather Ann Antonacci, Executive Coach and Chair with Vistage, Florida. And today I have the privilege of being joined by Paul Fioravanti. Paul, how are you today?
I'm very well, Heather. Thank you for having me aboard, and thank you for correctly pronouncing my name.
It was my last name like Antonacci. I try my best. And I don't take offense to it, as I'm sure you don't if someone mispronounces it.
Not at all. My mother used to say that's why we all got short first names. It's just
That's a good point. That's a good point. Even though I will tell you, my first name is Heather Ann, my last name is Antonacci, and Elizabeth is thrown in the middle there. So if I have to do a full signature, it could take a while.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there.
So thank you again for joining me on this Friday. Let's go ahead and get started because you have a great story to tell. And I would love, just to hear about your journey. So let's talk about the business. Let's talk about, the history and how you ended up where you are right now.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you. And I'll try to keep this short and focused. So I always say, people start out with an idea that their professional lives and their careers are going to be linear. You start in one place and go to another, but it seldom works that way, as you know. And my path as well was also nonlinear, and generally started out working in a family business. We had a 3-generation family business, which is a great learning ground, if you will. And I worked with my grandfather for a little bit, and then my mom and dad and siblings. So it was a good learning opportunity in terms of dividing work and all the things that have to get done in a business every day, which, as you know, don't end when you go home at the end. Continues. So obviously the more traditional part of the path was college, and then starting with a pretty large publicly held company. And I started doing a lot of project work. I worked directly for the CEO, and it was a long established older utility holding company. Energy products and services had been around for a long time. And I came in really at the tail end when there were a lot of changes happening, and worked in parts of the business that were more competitive. They had some non-regulated, non-utility type parts of the businesses, and also got involved in some of the investor relations and some of the M&A work. Did some labor relations work, communications. So I was kind of in a bunch of different areas. And thereafter, I went into construction startup, and also did some turnaround work in a couple of retail businesses, more on the large equipment side. These were construction equipment dealers.
Okay.
And at some point got involved with a startup that was a rentals company, large rental equipment. And did that for about 4 years. We took that through the Inc. 500. It grew tremendously. Then
Wow.
We hit some tough times during an economic pullback. And thereafter, I was with a series of companies and came in C-level roles, mostly to do operational and financial improvements.
Okay.
Typically as a COO or a president. Had 1 or 2 CFO engagements, which I don't prefer because I don't like that much math. And over that time, I would say, sort of a matrix of experience. I was teaching college part-time, teaching is probably the best way to learn. So I enjoyed that very much. Taught some.
What were you teaching?
Where or what? I'm sorry.
What were you teaching? What discipline?
It was a mix. It was marketing, it was management, it was operations management. One of my favorite courses to teach was services marketing, because it was focused on how services market and what the concept of providing services. Part of that is identifying gaps between what the customer expectations are and what's actually being delivered. And that was a great training ground to get into management consulting, because you develop a mindset for what the business model is, not just of a service organization, but a product organization or a manufacturing company.
Yeah.
Because generally, I refer to it as a misalignment problem, but a lot of times an organization, it has a particular concept. In the service industry, they call it a service concept, but it's just a business model concept. And sometimes that's very much misaligned with what the customer is expecting. And
okay, good point.
again, we tend to be, I don't know if the term is ethnocentric, but we tend to think about ourselves in our own focus areas and priorities. But a lot of times that's not what's in the customer's mind or in the prospect's mind. So companies that have been successful have been very good at understanding what their customers and their prospects are looking for. So again, a little bit of fast forward. I think in retrospect, since my first job, I've been in about 50 situations, I would call them. They may be projects, they may be turnarounds, they may be restructurings, it may be raising capital for a company. And I've worked in all different size businesses. I've worked in the mom and pops, and I've worked in some pretty large private equity held businesses. Just recently, I came in as a turnaround CEO in a pharmaceutical contract manufacturing business that had originally 9 global locations, then 8, and then we scaled that business down to 4 because at
Wow.
9 it was bleeding money. It was on $350 million in revenue. It was hemorrhaging. Net income was negative. EBITDA was negative. So we transformed that business with a team and made a lot of financial operational changes and brought the number of sites down to 3 domestic operations and then 1 in just outside of Milan. And that company is now a little more than a $225 million revenue business, but putting out almost 32 million in revenue. I'm sorry, 32 million in EBITDA. So the PE firm that owns it is very happy with that result. And a lot of times that's a typical project that I've been involved in. Let me ask you
a question on that, because
Sure.
I'm very curious. Do you go in with a team, or do you go in and have to work with the team that's in place?
It varies. And candidly, if you look at the rules of the playbook for doing a turnaround on an organization, frequently one of the constants is changing out the management team.
Okay.
And I will tell you from experience, and I've learned this from one of the great mentors in my life, is Jim Malone, who I've worked with since 2011. Jim is retired now, but Jim has run 6 Fortune 100 companies. Started out, started out working for GM, and he was brave enough back in the day to leave the warm bed of the big company, and he took challenges along the way in his career. But one of the things I've learned many things from him, but one of the things I've learned from him is that without the people element, you don't have a business. And we're not doing anybody a justice if we're scaring away the employees on day one. And what's so important is retaining the key members of the team that want to embrace change and want to follow the I don't want to say the marching orders, but they want to follow the focus or the new focus of the company, which may be very different from the guys under which they were hired. And not everybody can make that journey. Like in the pharmaceutical company, we inherited a pretty large management team, 10 or 12 people, a lot of executive vice presidents, and most of them had run away. Candidly, it wasn't for them. It wasn't what the guys under which they were hired.
And the situation changed.
I respect that. And if somebody can't add value, they should go. And I've done that myself.
Yeah.
We had one gentleman in particular that sticks out in my mind, a gentleman named Bill, who was an absolute pleasure to work with. And myself and one of my colleagues, we called him in one day, first day when we came aboard, and he thought he was coming in to get fired. And we said, no, we don't want you to go anywhere.
People always think the worst.
They always think the worst. And that's a great comment, because one of my personal theories on life is, we tend to focus on the half of things that can go wrong or go bad, but it's a 50-50 shot, right? Generally, you have as much opportunity to improve something and for things to get better than as get worse, right? So
Yeah.
in his case, he very much embraced the opportunity and was one of our key players in transforming that organization, as were most of the other 1,900 employees. And at the end of that transformation, we saved the majority of those 1,900 jobs because the employees embraced the changes that had to be made. So that's a great question you ask. And a lot of times, again, I always say, business situations are people situations, and the personal connection and the sharing of personal values and identifying with values is a major ingredient to success in transforming any organization. And
Absolutely.
we've seen recently companies that have been successful are the ones that are quick to change, quick to pivot. And I just recently did an interview with a business magazine in Florida. And one of the examples I gave them was, you walk into Publix supermarkets in Florida and they made the aisles unidirectional. And your first thought is, why weren't they always that way? Obviously in Florida, not everybody follows them because they can't even do it in the parking lot. But
well, I'm married to someone who's having a hard time with those one-way streets in the supermarket. So,
but again, a basic example of how a slight change can change the net impact, which is moving people through the system, not having people cross paths, which is the objective. And I have a client in Florida that runs a group of retail stores, and they're sort of in the consumer packaged goods, health products category. And they used it as an opportunity to refocus on their e-commerce business. They're going to be closing some of their stores because they were close to the end of the lease anyway. Mm-hmm. And they've realized that the value that they bring to the customer and the impact of their brand is greater than just being a static product on a shelf in a store in Florida. It's the relationship where somebody can get that product delivered directly to their home, exactly the way they want it. So that's the value in their business model, and that's the point at which they connect with the customer. That's their service concept.
And that's something, and we're hearing more about it, but that's going to be crucial to businesses as we transition out of this crisis to post-crisis, is how quickly, I shouldn't say quickly because it's not about quickness, how strategically they can pivot.
Yes.
Like I said, that I think that is going to be the game changer in some of the spaces that are overcrowded within certain industries.
One example I always use, I used to use this when I was teaching college courses, is Arm & Hammer baking soda. And if you think about it, I don't think there are a lot of people, maybe now because people are home, but I don't think there are a lot of people actually baking with baking soda. But that was a case of they repositioned the product. And one of my favorite books is the old Rise and Trout book called Positioning. And I think they use that example in there. And the point being that sometimes the opportunity to reposition or pivot is not in saying what you are, it's saying what you're not. And in the case of baking soda, they have all this production capacity and they have to literally create new uses for the product. So, okay, you put it in the refrigerator, you put it in the freezer, you brush your teeth with it, clean your bathtub with it, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And another great example in that book was, you remember 7-Up, which is still a popular brand, but it was sort of lost in the clutter of advertising in the 60s, and some genius came up with the Uncola. And it was positioning what it wasn't. And I think the businesses that are successfully navigating these challenges right now are also positioning what they are not. And they're saying that, we are not the company that used to do X, Y, and Z. We are now this. And that is very important. And recently we published a little summary called the 6 C's. And one of the C's, well, let me back up a step. So the thesis is that there are other C's before we get into the 6 C's, but there
The
is
preceding C's.
the preceding C. So there's the C of the COVID, and the COVID creates 2 other C's, which are chaos, right?
Yep, I knew that one was coming.
Yeah, exactly. Chaos and a lack of control. So what we really need to get is control. And the way we get that, and there's a whole series of them, I won't bore you with the details, but communication with stakeholders is, in my opinion, the number one. And one of the things I recommend to businesses of all size is create a frequently asked questions summary and anticipate the questions that your customers may want answers to, or your stakeholders may want answers to. And it might be like, when are you reopening? Or, is there another way I can get this product delivered to my house, or whatever the case may be. So managing stakeholders is really an art, and it's often done poorly by businesses. Again, I've been in business across all size businesses, and what you see are common denominator issues or failure factors, and a lack of closeness to the customer is often one of those failure factors, because again, the company's sort of mired in its own bureaucracy sometimes. Yeah. And they forget, what does the customer expect from us? And that's an important lesson. The companies that are going to be standing on the other side of this pandemic are the ones that have figured out how to stay close to their customers.
Do you think, so it's almost like it's not really a pivot, it's just a shift in mindset from not being such a transactional business, yes, and more towards a relational business.
Yes. Well said.
Do you find that more, because I'm thinking generationally, but do you find that more of the younger companies, and I mean younger in terms of, newer companies, not brand new startups, but do you find that the younger companies are more focused on the relational aspect than the transactional aspect of doing business? I mean, if you compare newer companies to companies, say 30, 40, 50 years ago?
Absolutely. And one good industry vertical to look at that demonstrates how the newer business models, and I don't want to say it's not really an age thing, it's a mindset thing, yeah, but the concept of disrupting an industry by getting closer to the customer is the best example of that in my mind is, you remember going to Blockbuster Video, and it was such a punitive experience. You're 2 days late, and the $3 movie that you rented is now $37.
Exactly.
Because, there are all these magical taxes they add on, and then you forgot that the last time you went in there, you bought the big thing of M&Ms that was $12 or whatever. So it became this abusive, grabby kind of business. And then Redbox comes in as this tremendous disruptor and combines the DVD with the vending machine, which is revolutionary, yeah, for some period of time. And then that changed, of course, with streaming. Redbox has its own series of streaming products as well, but Netflix comes along and further disrupts the industry. Mm-hmm. And now we enjoy the convenience of being able to watch a movie whenever we want, or watch anything. We also have that ability with Amazon Prime and Hulu and all the other products that are out there. And that competition is good because the customer wins. But yeah, to further answer your question, I think the disruptors in the market figured out that the customer wanted more. They didn't want an abusive relationship, mm-hmm, which is what Blockbuster was, and not to throw stones at Blockbuster.
Sure.
It fit the mold for the time, because that was light years ahead of, using your rabbit ears and hoping a good movie came on TV.
Oh, yeah.
So again, I think it's a matter of, in a truly innovative capitalist culture and very proactive development culture, economic development driven culture, which we are fortunate to have here in the US and globally, the pull on innovation comes from the customer saying, I want more, I want it on my phone, I want an app, I want speed, I want all these things.
I want instant access.
Yeah, it's great. And I use this Stepper app on my phone, and it's this, sort of, conscious on your shoulder, reminding you need to take 10,000 steps every day. But those are the kinds of lifestyle changes that we make because we have access to technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let me transition a little bit. Just, we touched on, the current chaos and the current crisis. Has anything changed for you in terms of how you're servicing your clients or what your clients are looking for now through this crisis stage and as we transition into post-crisis mode?
A lot less travel, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
I was traveling for about 80 weeks in a row in a mix of engagements. And I think just in Marriott, I've stayed in my lifetime about 2,000 nights, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. I've spent years.
Sure, it's how you keep track of it.
Yeah, well, it comes up on the app, but you start to realize that you spent like 12% of your life in a hotel room, which is very disturbing. And now, being the germaphobe that I am, I'm less interested in staying in a hotel room, but it's part of what I do. So the biggest change being that it's become more acceptable to do communications through these kinds of platforms and work remotely. I do have clients where I have to be physically on location, where they have a manufacturing facility. We're doing operational improvements on the floor, or whatever the case may be, and it's awkward and it's a little bit uncomfortable to be in a situation where you're thinking, can I catch something? Or
yeah.
So obviously, at some point, hopefully, we hope that normalizes, but the biggest change to my industry in terms of restructuring and turnaround and business fixes, financial and operational improvement, has been demand and capacity, because all companies, I shouldn't say all companies, but a recent statistic showed that 35% of American businesses are in a state of distress. And about a month ago, I read a report by JP Morgan that had gone back originally to 2016 and had been updated. But they had said that the average American business across all sizes and shapes of businesses only has a 27-day cash cushion, which means that obviously 30 days into this pandemic, everybody's frightened and circling the wagons. So there's a lot of demand for concrete planning to fix businesses. One of the basic things that everybody that does what I do does is called the quarterly cash flow. And what we look at is a rolling 13-week cash flow, which is a very rudimentary exercise. And businesses never do it until maybe they have missed a loan covenant, or their bank has said, hey, we need to see a cash flow because we want to know what direction this business is heading in. And a quarterly 13-week rolling cash flow essentially will look at three things. And I'm simplifying here, but it's really just a spreadsheet with 13 weeks on it. And then every week you drop a week off and you pick a week up. But it shows inflows, which is you're collecting receivables, you have cash coming in from somewhere. Maybe it's your own personal cash, maybe it's a bank loan, maybe you're drawing down your line of credit. So there's some inflows, and then there are outflows. And this is the part of the business that many business owners in this time don't realize, or didn't realize, that they had a bearing on. And those are things like, obviously, payroll is a huge category of expense.
Sure.
Benefits, taxes, and then paying the vendors and buying raw materials. So a couple of basic tricks can be done there. You can obviously stretch out vendors and try to stretch out obligations with negotiating with your stakeholders. Again, the communication piece I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and you have to have good communication established in advance of that before you go asking for that.
That's absolutely correct. And that's a great insight. And so few businesses reach out to their critical vendors. And a lot of times what we see happen is they have a line of credit that they maybe don't need, and they never use it. And then the bank says, okay, well, we're going to give it to somebody else. So what I always advise customers in normal times is if you have a line of credit, use it, even incrementally. Maybe, if it's a whatever, $100,000 line of credit, maybe in a given week you take 10 out, and then next week you put 10 back, but show some activity so that the bank stays in with you. And so back to the cash flow. So the three categories, again, are the inflows, the outflows, and then the net cash is the net cash that is accrued in a week or over a period of time. And it's essentially a scorecard to indicate, is the business building cash or burning cash? Because over a rolling quarter, you're going to get a clear perspective on what direction this business is headed in. And under a traditional banking commercial line of credit, the bank will want to see a borrowing base. Essentially, that illustrates what your receivables are or any other components of collateral or security for the bank as it relates to the amount that you've borrowed or the amount that you've drawn down on a line of credit. So, for example, the way most banks look at it is, let's pick a dollar amount. Let's, for round numbers' sake, it's a $1 million line of credit.
Okay.
And you have $1 million in receivables. So the bank may say, well, we will allow you to advance or draw down 80% of your receivables on this side of 60 days or 90 days, which banks vary, but they may consider that to be essentially current payables. So let's say that number is $800,000 in receivables. Then you could borrow 85% of $800,000, and that's what an advance would be. So maybe on a weekly or monthly basis, you'll have to give them a borrowing base, which illustrates what your receivables are. Maybe it's secured by inventory and other things, but it shows essentially what your borrowing position is. And again, what we've seen recently is under the terms of those lines of credit and other borrowing agreements, many companies are out of covenant, which means that either their fixed charge coverage or other debt to equity, net income, EBITDA, there are a bunch of different versions of covenants that a company may miss, and consequently they're technically in default, but the bank may not, they may just choose to what we call amend and pretend. They'll do an extension or an amendment to the loan agreement, and obviously liquidating is not a great option at this point in time. So they'll keep the borrower alive, and they may recommend that the borrower bring in somebody to put a different set of eyes on the business, and that might be somebody like me, or it may even be an attorney or an accountant, depending on what the situation is. But they will want a professional in there to take a look at what the situation is. So very often we get involved in those kinds of situations as well.
So the focus really for, and this isn't the first conversation that I've had about this, but the focus for business owners kind of transitioning out of this, cash flow is going to be the big picture. I mean, cash flow is really what business owners are going to have to look at, and look more, I guess, a longer span of time in terms of, cash flow.
That's right.
We hope that nothing like this will ever happen again, but just being in this situation, I think has really opened kind of that door where business owners are taking a look and saying, I thought I was secure, but, maybe I need to invest a little more time and maybe consultation, have someone else, like you said, a different set of eyes than what I've already used, come in and look at this, and how stable am I in terms of cash flow and longevity?
That's a great point. And one of the things that we always observe is, businesses and business owners and managers, again, all different size businesses,
Yeah.
We all have blind spots. It's just the
Sure.
nature of it. And one of the blind spots a lot of businesses have, and again, this is the value of growing up in a family business early on, but I remember my father saying that we can only sell it for X. So it's what we can buy it for or produce it for that matters. So you have to look at your internal efficiency and the concept of raw material, depending on how commoditized it is. The manufacturer, for example, has the opportunity to go back to the material supplier or the subcontractor in this market and say, look, I can sell this product finished at the dock, all in for $30, and my raw material cost is $23 from you. And I can't make it work because the customer is putting pricing pressure on me. Now they want it for $28. So the question is, you as my valued supply chain partner, and as my father used to say, we can eat together or we can starve alone. Can we work together, and can you get that price down to, say, $21? That way you get the order, I get the order, we keep this going, we have the volume, we keep the customer relationship, and we live to fight another day. And that continuity right now, and that longer term mindset and perspective, stay in the game, is very important.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I like your father's analogies on this stuff.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time, and I miss him dearly. But he gave us all lifelong lessons that we all draw from.
That's, if I was gonna, I've asked a few people that I've interviewed, what's one of the greatest, lessons or, business advice that you were given when you started on your career. And it sounds like for you, a lot of those would come right out of your father's mouth.
Actually, I did an article about it, I think about a year ago. And you've heard, Simon Sinek's big book is called Start With Why. And, it's interesting. It's sort of kitschy, but I thought it was a little bit simplistic for the business audience. But I wrote an article called Start With WTF. And the WTF is not what everybody thought it was.
But you got everybody's attention.
I got everybody's attention, but the story went like this. So I think I was 10, working in the summer, and he gave me a few things to do at the beginning of the day. And I was a hot shot, and I don't know, by 11:30 or whatever, hey, I'm done. I got to do something else. And he gave me spick and span and a mop and a bucket. And he said, wash the floor, WTF. And the lesson is, when you're in business, there's always an opportunity to improve. There's always something to do, and you can never be idle, and you can never rest on your laurels. And I've used that in every business I've been in. And if you want to start with a value system, nothing speaks louder than, and I had this happen to me one time, a CEO I worked with, I saw him emptying the trash at 7 o'clock. He was helping the night watchman empty the garbage. And I thought, wow, that's a great way to lead by example. And it really is. And my father didn't care about titles, right? We didn't have titles in a little family business. And honestly, I don't care about titles. I care about, what do we have to do? Can we get it done? And how, most importantly, and again, this is always what businesses should be focused on. Any decision you make in the business, is it in the best interest of the customer? Because if it's not, then it's not the right decision.
Well, it's not the right decision, and your business probably won't survive very long. In the end. I have to say that WTF has taken on a whole new meaning for me now. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You kind of led me into the next question I had, maybe without even knowing you were going to lead me into it. But you talk about Simon Sinek, and we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. People listening or watching this are going to learn a lot. About what you do and how you do it. and I think you touched on this, but I'd like to hear you just say it. When we talk about the why you do it,
Yes.
And, I have to believe that you operate in a fairly crowded space, right? So there's a lot of options out there for business owners and companies, to utilize service that you provide. But why would a business owner or a company want to do business with Paul?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say, again, this is just sort of on the basis of a composite view of being in a bunch of different industries and situations. But I think generally it's a work ethic and a level of fearlessness and optimism combined, if that makes sense.
It's a great combination.
Yeah, and honestly, again, I talked earlier about repositioning, right? 7-Up can say they're the uncola. Yeah. And I kind of view myself as the unconsultant because many of the big consulting firms, and I've done work for many of these firms as essentially a contract employee, but I'm sort of bemused by their LinkedIn posts because it's a lot of like golf tournaments and dinners, and it's 12 guys out at a steakhouse and kumbaya and look at us playing golf, and here I am on my yacht or in my mansion, and I'm thinking you're not adding any value to the customer, and the customer doesn't care at all about that because their house is on fire and they want the fire department right now. They don't care what kind of fire truck you have. They don't care how shiny your fire hat is. They want the water is what they want. And that's the opportunity for me as an individual and as a member of a team of great people that I work with that are subject matter experts in everything from accounting to HR to leading sales teams. It's funny, recently I just had a customer say, I was just curious, you sent us an invoice for X amount of dollars and it looks like you made 2 phone calls. And I said, I made 2 phone calls, but I knew who to call. And what was the end result for you? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. Like there was tremendous return on investment. So having the network and having an approach where you're willing to work hard and dig in. And I always tell people, whether they're employees that we've inherited when we come in as managing a turnaround, or it's contractors or team members that come in, you won't outwork me. And I will never ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do. And I will probably be the first person here and the last person to leave. And that's not bragging or anything else. That's a value system that I want to be able to deliver to my client or to their situation, because they're entrusting me to help them out of a situation or to improve a situation. And I take that very seriously. And I would certainly never hold myself up to the level of the amazingly unselfish or selfless healthcare professionals working out there right now, because these people are doing God's work, and they deserve to be taken care of, beyond the scope of the imagination. But there's a parallel in terms of an analogy, and we say in our trade that you can get a foot doctor, not that there's anything wrong with a foot doctor, but you can get a podiatrist for less than a heart surgeon. But if you have a heart problem, is it price that matters, right? Yeah. Is that the issue? So likewise, the situation is, if you're going into the emergency room, do you want an emergency room doc to take care of you? Or do you want the guy that wrote the book on emergency room medicine that's never been in an emergency room? So there's a huge value of the experience in everything that all of us do. And none of us have all the answers, but and one of the other important things I have to mention too is that when you do any kind of professional work, consulting, you're an attorney, you're an accountant, you're a sales manager, whatever the case may be, any trade for that matter, you can never look at a new situation and prejudge it. You can never say, oh yeah, this is just like the XYZ company that we worked on 2 years ago, because there are no two alike. And we follow a rule of you have to prove out the business case with data. So you have to collect objective information. You can't go on the basis of what everybody in the organization tells you. You have to prove it out based on data, understand what's happening, manage it, come up with a plan, readjust. And then over time, if you're working to improve the business and you're doing the right things, it will improve. Otherwise, it's not a viable business. And we've seen lots of those situations. Like, you wouldn't want to be running a Blockbuster Video franchise.
Yeah, no.
It's
Not
time.
going to be successful.
Yeah, time has passed. But again, I think that's a big part of it, is realizing you don't have all the answers, but it's a lot of hard work. And anybody that's going to hire me or anybody else that does what I do, they're going to want somebody that's all in and committed, because you can't just do it, from afar, and you can't do it in the abstract. It's hands-on work.
It goes back to that relational, because I will tell you, and even just listening to you talk about, the client who questioned, the 2 phone calls, and probably wasn't questioning the validity of the phone calls, but just wanted some more information on it.
Right.
And I tell clients all the time, I said, ROI, certainly everybody is out there looking for their ROI. But of equal importance is you should be looking for the ROR.
Yes.
The return on the relationship is equally, if not more important, as the return on the investment, because you won't get the ROI if you don't have a good ROR. And,
That's true.
And to your point, that's what it sounds like, that you not only have a team of subject matter experts there with you, but you put a lot of focus on the return on the relationship aspect of it that your client is going to, benefit from. And that's really where the value, I think, comes in. At least as much value as, the stability and the health of the business once you go in there.
That's well said. And being very forthright and candid and honest is so important. Quick example, again, I mentioned working as a CEO of a pharmaceutical manufacturing company. I don't know anything about pharmaceuticals. They asked me to go in. I've worked on a couple of projects here and there in medical devices or whatever, which is kind of the same, but it isn't. And in every industry, the people in the industry overvalue industry experience, because they always think, oh, who's this guy coming in? He doesn't know anything about pharmaceuticals.
Yep.
And you have to reposition that and say, well, the last guy that was fired that dug this enormous hole for you was an industry
Expert.
insider, right? Industry
Sure.
expert.
Yeah.
But that skill set isn't that important, because if you take a corporate employee and now you're making them an entrepreneur and you're putting them in charge of a startup, it's a different skill set. And it's not a good or bad thing. It's like,
Sure.
You've heard the story about when you take a great salesperson and you make them a sales manager and they fall on their face.
Yeah.
Different skill set. So the point I was getting at was everybody in an industry thinks their industry is unique and special, but it's really not. It's just like every other industry. There are a lot of common denominator issues. And in pharma, I wind up in a situation where I'm across the table from 3 or 4, highly compensated, long tenured, heavy duty pharma executives responsible for supply chain and patients' lives. And they want to know, what the heck is going on with this company? Why do we have a new CEO sitting in front of us? And why are you not a pharma guy? And my answer to that is, look, you guys have forgotten more about this industry than I'll ever know. Understood. Secondly, I will tell them the story about why I'm there and how I got there and what happened before. And then I will tell them that I will work extremely hard to make sure everybody in the organization does, to make sure that we don't put them or their patients in harm's way. Mm-hmm. And I will communicate with them regularly, and I will be brutally honest with them. And like the great Sergio Leone movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I will give them all 3. And that that is a difficult conversation to have, but it's a necessary conversation to have, because I have to earn my credibility up front in an industry where everybody looks at me like this guy doesn't know what the heck he's doing. And then fast forward a year, myself and my team members, we fix this business and transform it. And then it gets handed on to the next guy. And all that matters is we did our job.
Yeah.
And because we worked hard, we took it seriously, we made hard changes, and the business stayed alive. The patients got their medicines, the employees kept their jobs, and all is well in the kingdom. And, you know, there were a couple of upset board members along the way, but if they had been doing their job, then the company would not have been in the situation that it was in. So I sort of look at extremely poor governance as a great opportunity, because if these guys had been doing their jobs, they wouldn't need me.
Right. Right.
So somebody else's failure becomes your success, but then when you leave, it's their success because they're still the board member. But that's the way life goes. It's the nature of being an interim CEO.
I love your analogy of the Sergio Leone films, and as soon as you said that, I'm going, oh, that's fantastic. He takes it from the good, the bad, and the ugly to a fistful of dollars when it's all
Exactly. That's great. That is great. By the way, one of the posts I sent out a couple of weeks ago is one of the best scenes in that movie is Eli Wallach is running through this enormous cemetery graveyard that they built specifically to film that. The Spanish army came in and built a cemetery with 5,000 graves. And
wow.
The point of the movie is there's gold, $200,000 worth of gold buried in one of the graves, and he's running frantically. And Ennio Morricone's music, The Ecstasy of Gold, magnificent thing to watch in concert, is playing during Eli Wallach is running frantically. It's a great scene. And I had posted it because I said, when the economy reopens, this is like the image of the person looking for their PPP money, right? Frantically running. It's a graveyard. Where's the chest of gold? And we've seen that happen on all different scales. So fortunately, the government was responsive with coming up with a lot of programs to help businesses. And I think those came out of lessons that were learned in the last few economic crises where
absolutely.
Even the banks, banks were foreclosing on people's homes left and right. And I think they've learned that they didn't want to be in the empty house business.
Yeah.
So, they've been a little bit more flexible this time around. And one of my partners I mentioned earlier, Jim Malone, Jim was asked at the time when Governor Bush was in, they were restructuring the reinsurance market to come in and essentially do a turnaround and restructuring on Citizens reinsurance at the time. So I've got a little bit of tangential experience in understanding that process, but I think generally, a lot remains to be seen with this economy, but at least at the outset, there were some stopgap measures put in to minimize the carnage.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me, we could talk all day, but let me ask you, this may be the most difficult question I've asked you. Okay. So we're gonna pretend that you are at the Orlando International Airport and you are ready to board a flight, and you've boarded the flight and you're ready for takeoff, and it's a full flight, and you have the misfortune of being in a middle seat on a Southwest airline. Okay, so it's full, okay? Someone on the right, someone on the left, and the plane starts to take off, but a mechanical problem occurs and you're stuck on the runway. So obviously you're stuck on the runway, you can't get off the plane, right? Because once you've boarded, they're not gonna let you get off. Who would you hope to have in the seat on the right and the seat on the left while you had to sit there on the runway? Who would you want to have there and why?
Boy, wow, I can think of a lot of answers to that.
But you only have two seats.
I know, it's mostly diametrically opposed pairs, sort of like, Rodney Dangerfield and Ted Knight and Caddyshack. No, I'm thinking that, so this is people that are alive or past, present?
necessarily. Let's make it someone who's real, so no fictitious characters, but it may not be someone who's still with us.
Well, on a personal level, the short answer would be my mom and dad, but I know that's not what we're after. But so that's sort of a personal issue. We'll put that aside. But I think professionally, in terms of a business context, I would have to go with. I think Bill Gates would be one. I have a whole new appreciation for him after watching a bunch of documentaries on him. Obviously, a recent one was his, foretelling prediction about this pandemic from 2015.
Sure.
But what he's doing to focus on redeploying his wealth and making an impact with Warren Buffett, things like clean water and education and access to things that we take for granted. So I think his mindset for kind of a world vision would be very interesting because, at some point he's going to go away, as we all are. So I think that would be interesting. The other guy who I'm very drawn to in terms of the way he thinks is Ray Dalio, who is the founder of Bridgewater Associates. He wrote a great book called Principles, which I've read twice, 2.5 times really. And Ray has built, I believe, the world's largest hedge fund, but I'm not as much enamored with, the wealth and all that stuff as I am with the way he thinks and how he wants to give those principles back to young managers or managers of all ages, business owners of all ages. And I think being between those two gentlemen would be a fascinating conversation. They're both living, of course, but because I'd be interested in getting inside their minds in terms of what they see for my son's generation.
Okay.
And generations beyond, because these guys have a futurist orientation, and obviously they've been financially successful, but just to pick their brain in terms of what do they see and what do they see happening, that would be fascinating.
That was great. I love the mom and dad answer too. Next podcast, next interview, we can talk more about the influence from mom and dad. But that was great. That would be a very interesting seat to have. So let's wrap this up with letting people know, though some people are listening, some people are going to be watching this, some people maybe will do both. But if someone wanted to connect with you, Paul, or learn more about what you can do to help their business, or even just talk to you about, kind of what's going on with businesses now in the local economy, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
We have a website. Actually, I have 2 websites. One is it's a little bit difficult to spell. They both start with a Q. One is Cadent Management. It's QADENT management.com. And the other one is Corval, but it's spelled QORVAL.com. Those are the 2 consulting groups that I'm associated with. The simplest thing would be just to call the office number is 239-919-7000. And I'm happy to speak with business owners going through a tough time. I mean, I would say, there doesn't have to be anything in it for me. And if I can't help somebody, I will always try to refer them to somebody who can. But a lot of times people they just want some advice. They just want somebody to talk with. And I'm happy to do that, obviously, time permitting. Because, this is a time when we all need each other's help. And we should all be, kind of paying it forward and being, good partners, so to speak.
Very good. Well, thank you. This has been a pleasure. So again, I have spent some time with Paul Fioravanti. It has been so interesting and so great to learn about you and the services that you provide. So I wish you continued success. Stay safe. Stay healthy, and I think you're doing a great thing. I think you're offering some great services out there to businesses. And right now it is about the businesses, large and small. It's about the businesses finding, you know, something better, I guess, on the other side of this. You know, I say it's not so much about resilience as it is anti-fragility, you know, and the difference being, you know, coming out in a better place or striving to be in a better place than you were pre-crisis. So again, Paul Fioravanti, wonderful conversation, and I appreciate you so much for doing this. Thank you,
Thank you so
Paul.
much, Heather. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak with you today. And again, I wish you well and hope you're safe and well. So
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.